All right, so it is about 6 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Zoe. I am the Adult Programming and Community Outreach Librarian at Tredyffrin Public Library. Thank you so much for joining me tonight for the third and final iteration of Introduction to Excel. Before we get started with the presentation, I do have a quick announcement. All of us at the library have been proud and delighted to be able to serve the community in a multitude of ways throughout the pandemic. Virtual programs like this one, plus electronic materials, reference chat, curbside pickup, and more have kept the community inspired, engaged, and connected. But the pandemic has also caused a loss of revenue at our libraries and has increased many costs. Now it is likely that cuts to services and programs may come. If you can give any amount, we are very grateful for your support. You can click the link in the chat to donate tonight. Please make use of the chat and Q&A function throughout the presentation tonight to ask any questions that you may have along the way. And just so that you are aware, this presentation is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel shortly after the conclusion of the webinar for future reference. So I wanted to provide a quick recap of what we covered during the first and second installment. So during the first installment, we covered navigating the interface, understanding the ribbon and the backstage view, cell basics, how to enter data, and then how to format and organize that data. And then from that, we learned how to insert and format charts. During the second installment, we learned how to use the AutoSum function and how to create and use complex formulas. You can catch up on the first and second iterations by watching the recordings on the library's YouTube. The links are provided here in the presentation. If you pre-registered for this program, you should have received an email containing a PDF file of this presentation and the assignment or practice that we'll go over towards the end. These links should be clickable within that handout. I want to go over the glossary again really quick. I'll be using quite a few of these words throughout today's presentation, so I just want to refresh everyone's memory. So workbook is the entire Excel file, and within the workbook, you can have multiple worksheets, which are also known as the spreadsheets themselves. And as I mentioned, you can have multiple worksheets nestled into one workbook. Rows and columns refer to how your cells are aligned. Rows are horizontal and identified by numbers, and columns. Identified by numbers and columns are vertical and identified by letters. Cell is a rectangle or block that is the intersection of a row and column. Any data that you want to enter into your worksheet must be placed into a cell. So cell would be like A1, which is the cell address. Cell would be A1. Cell A1 would be the intersection of row 1, column A, or column A, row 1. And as I mentioned, cell addresses are referred by the letter and number of the column and row. So A1 and C10 are the cell addresses for those specific cells. Cell range is a collection of cells that have been identified as a group based on a variety of criteria, separated by a colon. So for example, here I have A1 to C1. This cell range will contain everything between A1 and C1, which will be A1, B1, and C1. An operator is a symbol or a sign that indicates which calculation must be made. So a plus sign would be addition, a asterisk or a star would be multiplication, and so on and so forth. In the previous presentation, in last week's presentation, I gave you a little handy table that gives you the basic symbols or basic operators you should know when working in Excel. Functions are formulas that are pre-built into Excel. So for example, AutoSum is considered a function. We will be going over some other functions tonight. I'll touch on average while we work with pivot tables and what-if analyses. And then finally, formula is a sequence inside a cell that is used to produce a value. So we used formula last week during our practice assignment where we balanced an imaginary checkbook. We had to create our own formula in order to determine our totals that night. I also want to go over the different types of cell references. There are two specific cell references, and it's relative cell reference and absolute cell reference. So a relative cell reference is when a formula changes as it is copied into another cell. So when a formula is copied across many cells, the data within the cell will change based on the position of the rows and columns. For example, copying the formula equals A1 minus B1 from row 1 to row 2, the formula will then become equals A2 minus B2. And this is how we completed our balancing a checkbook practice last week. When we copied and pasted our final formula, Excel was using the relative cell to kind of recreate the formula based on the cell that you're copying the formula into. And all cell references are relative by default. So when you type in a formula, as you see here, equals A1 minus B1, that means that it is within a relative cell. If you want to create an absolute cell, or you want the formula to remain constant regardless of where the cells are copied, you have to insert a $sign before the column and row that you do not want to change. So for example, here I have $A, $2, and this is telling Excel that both the column and the row does not change when the formula is copied. $2 means that the row does not change when copied, and $A2 means that the column does not change when copied. There are very specific moments where you would want an absolute cell, but very rarely you'll use them in basic Excel situations. Usually you'll want to keep the cell reference as relative so that the formula changes based on the row or column that you're copying and pasting into. And then I also wanted to go over using a cell reference within many sheets. So once you start working with Excel more often, you'll have different or many sheets, multiple sheets in one workbook. And a lot of the times those worksheets relate to one another. So for example, when budgeting, you can have 12 worksheets within one workbook, each worksheet representing a month. And you can use those different worksheets with each other. Excel lets you reference any cell within any worksheet that might exist in one workbook. To reference another cell from a different worksheet, you will need to begin the cell reference with the worksheet name followed by an exclamation point. For example, if you wanted to reference cell A1 on sheet 1, you should begin the formula with equals sheet 1 exclamation points A1. And this is just telling Excel that you are specifically referencing the cell A1 on sheet 1. So in order to reference cells across worksheets, you have to locate the cell you want to reference on the current worksheet. Then you'll navigate to the desired worksheet, and I can show you once we begin our practice after the presentation, I can show you what it looks like, to navigate throughout the worksheets in one workbook. But once you navigate to the desired worksheet, you will locate and select the cell where you want the value to appear on the desired worksheet. You will type in equals worksheet name exclamation mark or point, and then the cell address. So if you are working in a workbook that has multiple worksheets and you have renamed the worksheets, so say you are referencing cell C3 on the September worksheet, you would type in the name of the worksheet, which is September, exclamation point, and then the cell C3. And then once you press enter, the value of the referenced cell will appear in the desired cell on the desired worksheet. And note, if the value of the referenced cell is changed, Excel will automatically update the references across the entire workbook for you. Right, so now I'm going to go over pivot tables and what if analyses or analysis. So what is a pivot table? Pivot tables help you to make your workbook and worksheets much more manageable by summarizing data and thus making it easier for you to manipulate the data in a plethora of ways. So why should we use a pivot table? You can use the pivot table to answer different questions about a large data set. So if you were working with kind of the checkbook or the Skittles practice that we were working with, you might not want to use a pivot table just because it was such a small data set. But if you have a much larger data set, you'd want to utilize the pivot table skill. So for example, in one moment where you could use the pivot table is when you are working with a personal budget. You might ask the question, how much did I spend at Target across the month of February? If you've shopped at Target quite a few times throughout a month-long period, it can be time-consuming to locate the different amounts you've spent at Target and then sum those amounts together. A pivot table can instantly calculate and summarize the data in a way that's both easy to read and to manipulate, or pivot to answer additional questions that you have about the large data set. And our practice tonight is going to answer that question. I gave you some imaginary transactions, and we will answer the question, how much did I spend across the month of February at Target? And we'll also answer other questions like how much cash did I spend versus how much did I put on my credit card, and so on and so forth. Pivot tables can be really fun if you like kind of playing around with data and answering different questions. Pivot tables can make that incredibly easy for you. So here is an example of a pivot table in action. So this is just kind of a snippet of what our practice might look like tonight. So in the example below, you can see a pivot table. The pivot table itself is going to be here on the right in the blue. Within the original data set are recorded transactions for an imaginary personal budget. By using a pivot table with just a few clicks of your mouse, you are able to break down the sum totals by the store name as well as find the totals based on the method of payment. So you can see here, I have at least 13 entries of transactions that have occurred between the 1st of February and the 7th of February, the amounts, the store description, and the method of payment. By creating a pivot table, I was very easily, with just 2 clicks of a button, of my mouse button, I was able to figure out that I spent $368.80 at Target between February 1st and February 7th. And then I was able to break down the amounts by the method of payment. So you can see that I spent $148.20 in cash, and then I put $179.80 using a credit card. And the grand total will always be at the bottom of your pivot table. So how do we create a pivot table? First and foremost, you have to start, I'm going to go back to the previous slide. You have to start with a table already created within Excel. And this is what you'll create. You'll create a table with raw data and organize it the way that we learned in the first and second classes. So you'll always want to make sure that you create a table with the row heading and the column heading. So you know what column has which information in there. You want to make sure all of your data is organized. And once you have that table within Excel, you'll select the entire table, including the headers, that's very important, containing the data you want to use. So you want to click, drag, and highlight all of the table, including the headers. Click the Insert tab, and then on the Insert tab, you will click Pivot Table. And within the pivot table dialog box that pops up after you click pivot table, you have to select certain settings. So you want to make sure table range equals to table 1. That's just telling Excel that you were pulling from the table that you've selected. And then it's going to ask you where you'd like to place the pivot table. I always recommend putting it in a new worksheet just so that it's kind of separated and it's easier for you to kind of look through the pivot table without having to look at the unorganized data as well. In the pivot table field list, you check the box for each field you want to add. So in the previous example, I selected store and amount to calculate the amount from each store. I'm going to go back for just a moment. So you can see here it is organized by the store versus the amount here. You can also click, hold, and drag a field into a desired area. This had to be done for the method of payment and amount pivot table in the previous example. You'll see this in action when we complete the practice assignment for today. Sometimes when you click a specific field, Excel dumps it into an area where it doesn't display the data quite the way that you want it to. So you have to kind of click and drag it around, and I'll show you what that looks like. It's actually pretty intuitive and easy to pick up. Once you're happy with the fields and the desired areas, you'll click Update, and then you can edit or sort the data as you see fit. So you can, I'm going to go back just once more, you can edit or format just like you would with a table. So before you can see that the sum amount does not, it's not in dollar or cents. It's just pure numbers. But in this one, I was able to change this column so that it looks like currency. It has the dollar sign and it shows the full cents. So you can do that in your pivot table. You're not really restricted to how it kind of updates the table for you. You can edit the columns, and then you can also alphabetize or sort your data as you see fit. Note, if you change any of the data in your source worksheet, the pivot table will not update automatically. You will have to manually update the table. To do this, you will select the pivot table, click Analyze, and then within the Analyze menu, you will click Refresh. I wanted to add some tips and tricks for pivot tables. You can utilize the filter button to help narrow down data within your pivot table. To do this, you drag a field from the field list to the filters area. Click the drop-down menu with the filter menu, click select multiple items, and then select how you would like to filter the data. So I'm going to go back once more. So you can see here that all of the stores that are listed here in the original data are listed. And the original question I had was, how much did I spend at Target? Using the filter button, I would have been able to limit all of this so that it would just be Target listed here in the pivot table, rather than having to scan down, find Target, and then look over to the right to see the total for Target. You can utilize slicers to make filtering data easier. To add a slicer, you select any cell in the pivot table, click the Analyze tab, click Insert Slicer, and then within the dialog box, select the desired field and click OK. Then you can select or deselect items based on your question, and you can use the Control key to select multiple items at once. So that is pretty much a pivot table in a nutshell. And again, when we go over the practice assignment for tonight, we'll see it in action. So you'll see what the dialog box looks like and what the fields look like and how you can select different filters. Are there any questions about the pivot table so far or anything that I've covered? All right, so I'm going to go over what if analysis. And a what-if analysis can help you experiment and answer questions using the data that you've input, even data that might be incomplete. Why use what-if analysis? So tools within the what-if analysis, such as a goal seek, can help you determine goals that need to be met. Goal seek works by letting you start with a desired result, and it calculates the input value that will give you that result. So this is really great for budgeting. I also use it as an example for determining grades. So if you are currently in school and you have a big final coming up and you want to say get at least a B or an A in that class, you can use Excel to figure out what you have to get on your final. And I'll show you what that looks like in a little bit. Other what-if analysis tools include scenarios and data tables. Scenarios let you substitute values for multiple cells at the same time. This lets you create as many scenarios as you want and then compare them without actually changing the values within your data set. Data tables allow you to take one or two variables in a formula and replace them with other values to view potential results based on those values. For today, I am only just going to go over goal seek. This is the most used what-if analysis. So I mentioned you can use the what-if analysis to figure out what you'll have to get on a final in a class that you might be taking. So as you can see, using goal seek, we were able to determine the lowest grade we needed to earn on our final research paper to reach an 80% for the final grade. So I was able to, in the original data set, I have all of my grades listed here. You can see the final research paper is blank because I have not handed that in and it has not been graded yet. I calculated the average based on the grades so far. It's not weighted. If it's weighted, it would be a little bit different. But just for the sake of simplicity, I made it so that the grades weren't weighted. You can see that my final grade right now is a 79.25. I would say most professors would keep it at 79. They would not round up from a 0.25. I want to get an 80, which is in some schools at least a B or a B minus. So I have to figure out the lowest grade possible that I need to get on the final research paper. I say lowest just because it's the lowest you can get to get an 80. So if I score higher than the lowest, then that means my final grade will be higher than anticipated. So by using GoalSeek, this is what the dialog box looks like, and I'll explain more how to actually use that. But I'm basically telling Excel that I want my final grade to be an 80 instead of 79.25. And then I plug in a little bit more information. And then Excel tells me that my final research paper has to be at least an 86% in order to bump my final grade up to an 80. So here's the step-by-step guide on how to use GoalSeek for situations involving averages. So you enter the data and leave the cell blank that you need to determine, like the final research paper as you see here. You select the cell whose value you want to change. So note, when using GoalSeek, you need to select a cell that already contains a formula or function, which will be our final grade here, because this is what we want to change. We want this to bump up to an 80. So before we do anything with the goal seek option, we have to input the function to calculate our average so far. So in cell B11, I type in the function equals average and then the cell range. So in this cell here, I typed in equals average, and the cell range was from B2 to B10. You want to include that B10, even though there's nothing in there. So once you've calculated your average so far with the current data, you want to make sure that you've stayed clicking on the cell that the function is in. So right now it'll be B11. So you want to keep that highlighted. So once you have that cell selected, you will click Data tab, click What If Analysis, and then click Goal Seek. And then you will fill in the 3 fields listed here. So the first one is the set cell, and that is the cell containing the desired result, which is B11, which is our average. To value is the desired result. So I typed in the number 80 because I want to get at least an 80% in this class. And then finally, by changing cell, this is the cell where the goal seek will place its answer. So this is going to solve the final research paper or the minimum grade we would have to get for the final research paper. So we would type in B10 because that's where we want Excel to put our answer. Once you click OK, if a result is found, the result will appear in the specified cell. So you can see here on the final research paper in cell B10, I would have to at least get an 86 on my paper in order to bump my grade up to an 80. Sometimes if you've input the wrong cell numbers, it won't find a result just because it doesn't have the information that it needs. So always double check and always make sure that you start off by selecting the cell that has the formula or function in it. That's the one key piece of information that you need to remember when using GoalSeek. Always remember that you have to use a formula or function already in a cell. Next example for using a goal seek is to determine something with a budget. So in this situation, I am determining how many guests I can invite to a wedding based on a set budget I already have, a reservation fee, and then the price per person. So you can see here, based on the set budget of $5,000, I can invite at least or no more than 70 guests. It may seem a little bit weird at first, but I'll explain a little bit more in the next slide about how this goal seek works. So in this cell B4, I have the function to total cells B1, B2, and B3, which is why it says that it's only 1,500. So when I open up the goal seek dialog box, this is where I tell Excel that I have $5,000 in my budget. And then I set the cell or set the set cell and then change or set the by changing cell. And then Excel calculates that I can invite no more than 70 guests based on my $5,000 budget. So here is a step-by-step guide on how to use GoalSeek for a situation involving budgeting totals. So again, you enter in the data and leave the cell blank that you need to determine. Select the cell whose value you want to change. When using GoalSeek, you need to select a cell that already contains a formula or function. So in cell B4, I input the function equals B1 plus B2 times B3 so that we would be able to figure out the total budget based on the reservation fee, the price per person, and the number of guests. So then you click the Data tab, click the What If analysis, click Goal Seek, and then fill in the 3 fields. So again, set cell is the cell containing the desired result, which in this case is the total budget. So that'll be B4. And then your to value will be your total budget that you have available. So even though this says 1,500, we're going to tell Excel that we have a maximum of $5,000 to spend. And then the changing cell will be B3 so that it can calculate how many guests based on our total budget, the fee, and then the price per person. Once you click OK, and if a result is found, the result will appear in the specified cell. And you can see here that Excel figured out that I can invite 70 guests to my wedding. I also wanted to go over some additional tips and tricks for when you're just using Excel for anything. Freezing panes is an option that I definitely use a lot, especially when I'm using data sets that are extremely large. So by freezing rows or columns, you can scroll through your worksheet while continuing to see the frozen cells. This can be handy for most tables that contain a large amount of data. You can find the Freeze Panes command within the View tab on the ribbon. You can also change your view options on Excel as you are working along with multiple worksheets or multiple books. So you can open a new window or split your worksheet into different panes to make it easier to compare data sets. You find the different view commands like New Window or Arrange All in the View tab on the ribbon. You can also split a worksheet. So the split option lets you divide the worksheet into multiple panes, which you can scroll through separately. Find the split command in the View tab on the ribbon. So that's all I wanted to go over today. In a few minutes, we'll go over the practice together, which will cover how to create a pivot table and also how to utilize the goal seek skill within the what if analysis. Okay, so I'm just going to exit the presentation. Whoops, I exited out of the chat. I'm going to exit out of the presentation so that we can work through the assignment together. So if you are working or watching the webinar on a computer, feel free to open up an Excel workbook so that we can work through it together. You should be able to see my Excel. Try to make it a little bit bigger for everyone to see. So with the practice assignment, we are going to analyze a personal budget using a pivot table. So first we have to create a table by clicking the Insert tab and Table. So again, as I mentioned in the previous classes, I am working on a Mac computer. So my Excel looks different just because it's on a Mac and it's the newest version. This presentation was based on Excel 2013, which is the version on the library computers. Things will look a little bit different, but your basic skills will still be there. So I'm going to go ahead and click Insert and then click this table here. And then it's going to ask me to confirm that I want to put or start the table in A1. And you can see here the absolute cell reference is in use. So you see the $sign, a $1. That means it is absolute. It will stay and start in A1. So we'll just click OK. And you can see here that Excel already popped in a header row and dropped down one row for data. We want to format the table to have 5 columns and 31 rows. So I'm going to, you see a little tiny square here. And when you hover over it, you see this mouse pop up where it's a square and 2 arrows on the corner. We'll click, hold, and drag so that there are 5 columns. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you can see that the green, the kind of light shade of green, it's kind of showing you where your table will be placed. So I'm just going to let go of the mouse and you can see that I now have 5 columns. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that filter button. We don't need that just yet. And then don't worry about the 31 rows. Once we start entering the data, it'll automatically add the rows for us. So you don't have to worry about formatting to have 31 rows. Once we start typing, it'll start adding more rows for us. So we have to tell Excel what each column is or what data will be put into each column. So in column 1, we will type in description. That'll be the description of the transaction. Type in source. In column B, it'll be the store where the transaction happened. In column 3 or column C, we are going to type in amount, and that'll be the total of the transaction. And then in column 4, we are going to type in method of payment, and this will be how the transaction was made, cash, credit, or debit. And then in column E, we are just going to type the word date. So just for the sake of time, I'm just going to copy and paste the data Okay, so I have pasted in the data that is provided for you in the assignment. And again, this is just an imaginary budget. I completely made it up as I went along. So on the assignment, I have you format the table by deselecting the filter buttons, which I've already done. But let's go back and look at it. So in the table, you can have the filter button. It'll just organize it based on ascending, descending. This is just an easier way for you to sort your data. But sometimes I think the filter button gets in the way and I don't like the way that it looks. And I'm just going to pick a lighter color. And then I'm just going to drag the column width so that the row heights are universal or all the same size. So I just hovered over the space in between the two columns. When this line with two arrows cursor pops up, you'll click, hold, and drag to resize. And you could do that with the rows as well. So let me just make sure everything. So I'm just going to highlight the entire table and then go back to the Home tab on the ribbon. Click the Format Command button on the Home ribbon, and then click Auto Fit Row Height so that they're all the same size and it's universal. And then I'm just going to center the column headings. It's just a habit that I do. So next I ask that you format the data in column C to show dollars and cents for all entries. And this is a skill that we covered last week. So you want to highlight the entire column by just clicking the column that the data is in. And the easiest way to do it is just to click this $ here, and you can see the $ has been added and the total cents have been added as well. And then I ask that you format the data in column E as day, month, year, which has already been done. But if you wanted to explore the different dates, you can do a short date, long date, or if you click more number formats, and then date, you can see all of the options that are available. There are so many, but for today, I'm just going to leave it as day, month, and year, and just click OK. And you can see that nothing has really changed. So now here comes the fun part. We are going to create a pivot table. And I have you answer 5 specific questions about this data set. The first is, how much did I spend at Target over the month of February? Second question is, how much did I spend on groceries over the month of February? Third question is, how much did I spend using my credit card? Fourth question is, how much did I spend using my debit bank card? And fifth question, how much did I spend using cash? So to create a pivot table, we are going to select the entire table and remember to include those headers. So once it's all highlighted, we are going to go to the Insert tab and then click Pivot Table. And the dialog box will pop up. So we want to make sure Table 1 is selected. And then we are going to tell Excel to put the pivot table in a new worksheet. So we're just going to click OK. And you can see here a new sheet has been added. I'm just going to drag them so that they're in order. And I mentioned during the presentation, I will show you how to kind of rename and organize your sheets, or where your sheets will look or where they'll be organized in your workbook. So you can see here, pivot table is in sheet 2 and the original data is in sheet 1. When it does that. Come on. So let's go back to sheet 2 so we can use our pivot table. So when you have the pivot table selected, just select any cell that this table is in. You can see the fields pop up. If you are on a Windows computer, there's a chance that it's an extra window that pops up. All of mine seem to always pop up on the right-hand side. So first, let's focus on answering the question, how much did I spend at Target over the month of February? So we want to select amount and source. So by selecting amount and source, we're basically telling Excel to give us the amounts based on the store. So I have shopped at multiple stores in the data. So let's go back here to sheet 1. So you can see here Target is listed multiple times, and I believe Giant and CVS are listed multiple times as well. So what the pivot table does is it adds all of those sources together. So Giant, I spent $380.08 at Giant. And then to answer our question, we can just look at the table itself and see that we spent $434.75 at Target, but you can also filter it out like I mentioned. So let's play around with the filters. So the filters is going to be the top left box. We're going to click, hold, and drag source to the filter, and then you can see here there's a filter button. We're going to click this, unselect select all, and scroll down to just select Target, and then it'll just give us here, very simply, source, Target, and the sum amount is $434.75. Just going to pop the source back in there. Oops. Oh, it is still filtered. Let me select all. There we go. All right, so that answers the first question. Let's look at the second question. How much did I spend on groceries over the month of February? So to answer that question, we are going to have to narrow down the amounts to the description. If we go back to our data set, you can see here in the description I have groceries multiple times. So we'll just have to tell Excel to organize the amount based on the description. So let's go back to our pivot table, uncheck source, and then check description. And you can see here, it's just telling me that there are 27 different descriptions. We want to organize it based on the descriptions themselves. They all have their own row. So we're going to find count of description and move it over to rows so that the description now is listed here. I'm going to drag that up to filter so that we can filter it like we did with Target. Going to deselect all, scroll down and click groceries, and you can see here that I spent a total of $380.08 on groceries. I go back and select all and pop that back down on the row. I did mention before that you can format the data within the pivot tables themselves. So if this is bothering you, if you know that this should be money, even though it doesn't look like it, you can select the whole row or the whole column, click the $sign, and then change it so that it is formatted the way it is on your original data. So the next three questions can be answered by using one or pivoting the table just once. So the questions were, how much did I spend using my credit card, debit, bank card, and cash? So if we deselect description, we now want to select method of payment. And then we are going to drag that count of method over to rows so that it's organizing the sums based on the method of payment. So to answer the questions, we spent $214.70. In cash, we spent $593.64 on our credit card, and we spent $432.92 on the debit bank card. So that is a pivot table in a nutshell. It's actually really fun to play around with, especially if you're kind of asking different questions about your data. If you just have raw data, that is just a lot to take in. You can use a pivot table to help you kind of figure out questions with 3 clicks of a mouse that would typically take you a lot of different functions and a lot of different formulas to figure out just with a raw data table. Are there any questions about pivot tables that I could answer? Maybe show you the answer in real time? Oops. I did mention that I would show you how to kind of edit your sheets. So I'm going to rename these sheets. So when you have a sheet here, it'll look like little tabs. Like if you have a binder and you divided your binder up into little tabs, that's what it's going to look like. And they're automatically default to sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3. It goes on however many sheets you add to a workbook. But you can rename them for organization's sake. So if you right click where it says sheet 1, you'll get a menu pop up. It'll say insert sheet, delete, rename, move or copy, and etc. You can even change the color of the tab, which is pretty handy if you are a color coder. But we're just going to rename it for tonight. So I'm going to click rename, and then I'm just going to type in raw data and hit enter. And then I'm going to do the same for sheet 2. I'm going to right click, rename, and then call this pivot table and hit enter. And that is how you basically rename or reorganize. And if you want to move them around, you can click, hold, and drag and move the tabs around based on how you want to organize your data. If there are no questions for pivot tables, I'm going to move on to the final part of the practice assignment tonight, and that is using the what if analysis or the goal seek. So I wanted to have you practice entering in a new worksheet on one workbook. So we're going to add a new worksheet, and you do that by just clicking this little plus button and it'll add it in. So you can see that it added it in between raw data and pivot table because I was on the raw data tab. If you wanted it to be after pivot table, you want to make sure you're on pivot table when you click that plus button. But I'm just going to drag it to the end here. I'm going to rename it and name it Goal Seek. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you. All right, so we've inserted a new worksheet and renamed it accordingly. And now we are going to enter the following text into the cells as indicated. So in A1, we are going to just type in wedding budget. A2 is reservation payment. Row A3, whoops, I'm sorry. I said to put that in A3. A4 is cost per person. And A5 is number of invited guests. And then A6 is total. Again, I'm just gonna drag the A column so that it fits the text size. And then I have you enter in the data for column B. So reservation payment is $5,000 and the cost per person is $20. We are leaving B5 blank because we want to figure out how many invited guests we can invite or how many guests we can invite to the maximum based on an already determined budget, which is $10,000. I have that below. So before we jump into using goal seek, we first have to put in that function. So we're going to jump down to cell B6 and input the function to calculate the grand total of the wedding budget, which equals B3 plus B4 times or asterisk B5 and hit enter. So you can see it calculates 5,000 because we don't have how many guests we can invite. So it just kind of adds it to 0. So if this is left blank, it's multiplying B4 and B5 together. So it's saying 20 times 0 is 0 plus 5,000. And then I'm just going to change the content of these cells to say that it's money or accounting, just so that we know that it is money. All right, so now we are ready to use the goal seek. So first we want to select the cell whose value you want to determine. So we're going to leave it on B6 for the grand budget total. We're going to go over to the data tab on the ribbon and then click the what if analysis and click goal seek. So the goal seek dialog box will pop up and we have to determine the set cell, which is B6. The to value, we are going to tell Excel that we have actually a budget of $10,000. And then we are going to tell Excel to change the number in cell B5 or the total number of invited guests based on the $10,000 budget and cells B3 and B4. So once you click OK, it's going to calculate it for you. You can see here that the total has increased to $10,000. The reservation payment and cost per person stay the same, but Excel now tells me that I can invite 250 guests to my wedding, which I think is a very large wedding, but I was able to figure this out with the click of maybe 3 clicks of a mouse button, and I didn't have to go through the painstaking math equations of figuring that out. So the goal seek is a really handy feature if you don't want to do math. I am one to kind of hesitate with math. So Excel has become kind of my friend, especially with the goal seek and the pivot table. So that is what if analysis and a pivot table in action. Did we have any lingering questions? I'm just going to pull open the presentation really quick. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them into the Q&A or the chat, and I'm happy to answer them. But I just wanted to show you, if you wanted to do the practice on your own, type in the data that I gave you one by one. You can see the final product on the handout. So you make sure that everything kind of looks the way that it should based on the data that I gave you. And this is also the final product for the goal seek. So while we wait for additional questions, I'm just going to show you my contact information and the library's information. So if you want more assistance with Excel, you want to work more on pivot tables, or you want to see complex formulas more closely, you can give me an email, or you can schedule a one-on-one tech session. I offer one-on-one tech sessions Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. and Saturday at 4 p.m. You can click the link in the handout to schedule if those times work. If they don't, you can always give me an email and I will try and find a time that works for both of us. And then we'll have an hour to achieve any goals that you have. So this extends beyond Excel. So if you have questions about, your smartphone, how to use Libby, anything and everything, you can always schedule a one-on-one tech session. And then again, here is the contact information for Twitter Public Library, our phone number and email, as well as Paoli's phone number and email and our shared website. So thank you so much for joining me tonight and joining me across all 3 Excel or Introduction to Excel webinars. I hope you learned a lot. Again, feel free to email me or give me a call if you are playing around with Excel and you come across a question that I didn't address during these presentations. I am happy to answer any questions you have. Have a great night.